In December 2019, Mikel Arteta was appointed head coach of Arsenal. At the time, he was considered a Pep Guardiola acolyte. An assistant to Guardiola at Manchester City since 2016, he was to be the heir apparent, raised to protect the traditions developed by Guardiola across a glittering career. 5 years on though, while Arteta has turned Arsenal into one of the best football teams in the world, he's done so via a perhaps unexpected route. This is the story of how and where Mikel Arteta deviated from Guardiola's tactical pathway. Guardiola isn't secretive about his tactical blueprint. "My dream is to shut our 11 opponents up in their area and prevent them from crossing the halfway line," he said. And this is the modern interpretation of attack being the best form of defence. Guardiola wants to defend, but with the ball. Because if you've got the ball, your opponent can't score. And what safer form of defending could there be than that? But this comes at a cost. By forcing the opponent into their own penalty box, Guardiola is working against the logic that most football managers follow. The received wisdom is create space when you have the ball and deny space when you don't. Guardiola is proposing the opposite. Prevent space in possession by forcing your opponent to defend compactly and leave yourself vulnerable to counters by allowing big spaces to open up behind you. However, it works. Despite the risk, Guardiola's teams have been able to control games in such a way that they score more goals than they concede, and as a result, win more games than they lose. So effective has this approach proved to be that it's dominated the tactical conversation over the last decade. And everyone expected Mikel Arteta to follow in these footsteps. Arsenal finished 8th in their first 2 seasons under Arteta. It was a bit underwhelming. There was an FA Cup win in 2020, but at the time it didn't feel as though it necessarily fit the bigger picture. But in hindsight, this was part of the process. First and foremost, Arteta wanted to make Arsenal better without the ball. When he arrived at the club, the defensive numbers were poor and threatening to get worse. The immediate task was to halt this decline. Only then could he start worrying about how to improve Arsenal with the ball and go on to challenge Guardiola at the top of the league. With this done, the 22-23 season was a watershed moment. Although the previous year had seen Arsenal take big steps forward, this was the season where they did that with the ball, and it led to the club becoming a permanent fixture at the top of the Premier League table. At that time, the allusions to Guardiola were inevitable. In the summer of 2022, Arteta signed Gabriel Jesus and Alexander Zinchenko from Manchester City, and he would later describe their impact at Arsenal as world-changing. With Zinchenko inverting from fullback and Jesus playing as a Guardiola-like 9, it seemed clear that Arteta was following in the footsteps of his mentor and building a team in his image. But then something changed. Despite topping the Premier League table for a record 248 days, Arsenal eventually ceded ground to Manchester City, and the disappointment was compounded by a 4-1 loss to Guardiola's team at the Etihad that all but sealed Arsenal's fate as runners-up. That loss might have been a fork-in-the-road moment. Arsenal were missing William Saliba, and yet remained undeterred in their efforts to press City high and take the game to them. In response, City cut through them with ruthlessly efficient direct attacking, and it was a disaster. The next summer, Arsenal's transfer strategy was instructive. A record fee brought Declan Rice to the club, who joined Kai Havertz, Jurrien Timber and goalkeeper David Raya, 4 players who would all bolster the team's defensive output. This produced a different Arsenal to the previous season. They felt more resilient, and they had a drive to them that saw them winning games late on as they gradually ground teams down. And it was a team that seemed to have diverged from Guardiola's tactical blueprint. Where their ball progression numbers had jumped up the previous season, they now started to creep back down. Arteta appeared to be questioning one of Guardiola's central ideas. Was it really necessary for elite sides to possess the ball as much as possible to win games? As time had gone by, Arteta seemed less concerned about defending with the ball and increasingly comfortable about defending without it. But of course, spending less time on the ball does come at a cost. It is harder to create chances if you don't have it, and the numbers suggested as much. Arsenal ended up in 6th place in the Premier League ball possession table that season, a position which translated to 6th place on the open play expected goals table. But the Spanish coach also detected an edge here. With the help of Nicolas Over, the set-piece coach he brought with him from Manchester City, he went about turning set-pieces into a means of making up the difference for any decline in attacking numbers caused by this more defensively sturdy Arsenal. And with this combination of out-of-possession solidity matched up with very good attacking numbers, Arteta would do something that had never been achieved before during Guardiola's Premier League tenure. He would produce a team that were putting up better underlying numbers than Manchester City. In the end that season, Arsenal narrowly lost out on the title by a couple of points, but Arteta had shown that another route to Premier League supremacy was possible. And that of course brings us to the present day. It remains to be seen, of course, whether or not this new iteration of Arsenal can overcome the final hurdle of Manchester City. If they do though, that victory will have been achieved by a coach who has diverged from the pathway that was laid in front of him. While the influence of Guardiola is apparent and will never go away, Mikel Arteta has evolved beyond his mentor and is introducing the world to a different way of coaching a football team. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League football story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.